Emily sat alone at the kitchen table, the soft hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the room. It had been almost 2 hours since she had come home from work, her heart quietly sinking with each passing minute. She had hoped at least today her parents would remember. It was her birthday after all. But as the clock ticked closer to 8 p.m., the silence of the house pressed down on her like a heavy weight. No call, no message, no knock on the door. She had tried to convince herself that maybe they were just busy, or perhaps they would surprise her later. But deep down, a familiar cold ache began to settle in her chest. Every year it was the same. As the years passed, the distance between them grew wider. It wasn't that they didn't love her, it was just that life had become a series of priorities, and Emily had somehow slipped to the bottom of that list. She glanced at the untouched birthday cake on the counter, the candles still flickering weakly. Another year, another disappointment. Maybe I'm just asking for too much, she thought bitterly, rubbing her eyes. But as the night stretched on, it became clear. No one was coming. No one cared enough to remember. It was just her now. The quiet hum of the kitchen became almost unbearable as Emily tried to calm the storm of emotions swirling inside her. It was just a few hours ago that she had been excited, hopeful even. This year, surely, it would be different. But the feeling of being forgotten, of being invisible, crept in like a cold shadow. She glanced at her phone again, half hoping for a sudden miracle, a message from her parents or a call from her best friend. But there was nothing. No reminder of the day that had once meant so much to her. It had been a tradition, after all. Birthday cards, cake, phone calls, and warm hugs. Now, it felt like a distant memory, like something that had only existed in her childhood. She felt foolish for hoping. She had outgrown this need for recognition, hadn't she? Still, the emptiness gnawed at her, and the ache in her chest only grew. As her phone buzzed again, she glanced at the screen, relieved to see Jack's name. He had always been there for her, and in a way, his presence had filled the spaces where her family couldn't. But as she swiped to answer, the familiar sadness lingered. She wasn't sure if she wanted to hear his cheerful voice right now, or if it would only remind her of how deeply alone she felt. As Jack's voice came through the phone, it felt like a small lifeline in an ocean of silence. "Hey Em, happy birthday. I hope your day's been great, even if it's been a bit low-key." The upbeat tone in his voice contrasted sharply with the heaviness in her heart. She had never been good at hiding her feelings, but tonight she felt utterly drained. "It's fine," she said, her voice quieter than usual. "Just, another year." Her response hung in the air, thick with unspoken words. Jack didn't seem to pick up on her tone, though. "Well, I'm glad to hear it's been good. I thought we could meet up tomorrow and do something fun. Maybe grab dinner?" His suggestion was nice, but it only seemed to highlight the stark difference between her life and the life she had imagined. The life where birthdays were special, where people remembered. "Yeah, sure. I'd like that," Emily replied, forcing a smile. But deep down the emptiness remained. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. It wasn't just about a forgotten birthday. It was about feeling unseen, unheard. Jack's kindness only made her realize how much she craved validation from the people who should have given it to her first, her family. When the call ended, Emily placed the phone down gently. Jack's voice had been comforting, but it only reminded her of how much she craved the comfort of her parents. As she stared at the empty table, the cake still there. Its candles long gone out, she thought back to the years when her birthdays had been filled with laughter and excitement. She remembered the days when her parents would make a huge fuss over her, the special gifts, the homemade cake with pink frosting, the balloons hanging from every corner. Those days were so vivid in her memory, like a scene from a movie she wished she could rewatch. But now, there was nothing left. She stared at the cake, the sadness overwhelming her. "What happened?" she whispered under her breath. She had always told herself that the birthdays didn't matter anymore. That, as an adult, she was supposed to be past the need for a celebration. But deep inside, she longed for that same affection, for that same attention. But it felt like a distant dream, an impossible wish. Her hands clenched at her sides as she stood up abruptly. She couldn't stay here anymore, drowning in the memories of what was and what could have been. Emily moved to the window, looking out into the darkened street. The moon hung low in the sky, casting pale light on the quiet, empty roads. She pulled the curtain back slightly, just enough to see the stillness outside. It was as though the world had carried on without her, indifferent to her pain. The loneliness washed over her again, and she closed her eyes, leaning against the cold window. She thought of her parents, of how they had always been there when she was younger. Why had things changed so drastically? Why did she feel like she had been replaced by everything else in their lives? Her mind raced with questions, but there were no answers. She didn't know how much longer she could take it. She had tried to be strong, to accept the way things were, but there was something about this night, this birthday, that had torn away the facade of strength she had been holding on to. It wasn't just the forgotten birthday. It was the realization that over time, she had become insignificant to them. "I don't matter," she thought, the words echoing in her mind. The days following her birthday passed slowly, each one blending into the next with the same numbness. Emily tried to keep herself busy, distracting herself from the pain of feeling overlooked. Work kept her occupied, but her mind wandered in quiet moments. She thought about the years when her birthday felt special. Her parents' voices filled with excitement as they sang her happy birthday, the smell of freshly baked cake, and the gifts she would unwrap, each one chosen with care. Those memories felt like they belonged to someone else, someone who had long since been replaced by the silence she now lived in. Every time she passed the kitchen, her eyes would linger on the cake that still sat on the counter, the frosting hardened, untouched. She tried to bury the thoughts, but they resurfaced. She had spent the better part of the last few years telling herself it didn't matter. "I'm an adult now," she'd say, convincing herself she was beyond such childish desires. But deep down she couldn't escape the truth. She was hurt. She was still her parents' daughter, but they didn't seem to notice anymore. Her place in their lives felt smaller with each passing day. It was a quiet Saturday afternoon when Emily decided to call her mom. She had been avoiding it for a few days, unsure of what to say, but the weight of the silence had become unbearable. She needed some kind of closure, even if it meant confronting the hurt she had buried. The phone rang 3 times before her mother picked up. "Hey, honey, how are you?" Her mother's voice was as warm as ever, but there was something distant about it, like she hadn't even realized the significance of the day that had passed. Emily forced a smile, though her voice was strained. "I'm good, Mom. Just missing you guys, you know? I feel like we haven't caught up in a while." Her mother responded with a cheerfulness that didn't quite match Emily's tone. "We're good, busy, but you know how it is. Everything's going great here." Emily hesitated, feeling the frustration bubble up. "Yeah, I know," she replied, her words careful. She didn't know how to bring up the fact that she had spent her birthday alone, the feeling of abandonment gnawing at her. "You didn't even call on my birthday." There, it was out, hanging in the air between them. Her mother paused, and Emily could almost hear the wheels turning on the other end of the line. "Oh, sweetie, I'm so sorry. It just slipped my mind with everything going on." Her mother's voice crackled through the phone, apologizing over and over, but Emily could tell the sincerity was missing. "I'm sorry, honey. You know I didn't mean to forget." It wasn't the apology she had been hoping for. It wasn't even close. Emily didn't respond right away. Instead, she closed her eyes, willing herself to stay calm. "It's fine, Mom. Don't worry about it," she said, though her words felt hollow even to her own ears. She wanted to scream, to demand that her parents see her, but the words never came. She had done this dance too many times before. She had begged for their attention, only to have her requests fall on deaf ears. She wasn't a child anymore, and no amount of pleading would change that. She had to accept it. They had moved on. She was no longer the center of their world, and it hurt more than she was willing to admit. "It's just a birthday," she muttered, trying to convince herself. "Just another day." But deep inside, she knew it wasn't. It was a symbol of everything she had lost. After the call ended, Emily felt an odd sense of emptiness, as if the conversation had only made things worse. She couldn't bring herself to feel relieved by the apology. It didn't fix anything. She stared at the phone for a long moment, before setting it down. She had gotten her answer. Her mother had apologized, but it didn't change the underlying truth. Her family had become distant, wrapped up in their own lives, too busy to remember the important things, like her. She thought back to her childhood when birthdays had been sacred, when the family would gather around the table to celebrate each other. The absence of those moments made the present feel even more painful. The silence that followed the phone call echoed louder than her mother's words. Emily slowly walked to the couch and sank down, curling up into a tight ball, wishing she could somehow turn back the clock to when things were simpler, when she still mattered to her parents. Days passed, and Emily found herself struggling with the weight of it all. She had reached out, hoping for some sort of recognition, but instead she felt more invisible than ever. Work became her only refuge, a place where her mind could focus on something other than the emptiness she felt at home. Still, there were moments when she couldn't escape the nagging feeling of abandonment. She had tried to keep her head down, to push through the loneliness, but it followed her like a shadow. Every time she looked at her phone, she half hoped for a message, a call, anything. But there was nothing. Jack had tried to cheer her up, suggesting they go out for a night to unwind, but Emily wasn't sure she could fake happiness anymore. She didn't want to drag him into her misery, but she also didn't want to be alone. The silence of her apartment had become deafening, and she longed for something to break it. The quiet never felt more oppressive than now. She couldn't stand the emptiness any longer. Emily sat in the corner of her favorite cafe, her hands wrapped around a mug of warm coffee. She had agreed to meet Jack for a much-needed distraction, but even the buzz of the coffee shop couldn't drown out the chaos inside her. The conversation with her mother had left her feeling emptier than before. The apology had been lackluster, and nothing had changed. It felt like every time she tried to reconnect with her parents, they were slipping further away. Maybe I've been holding on to something that doesn't exist anymore, she thought bitterly. Jack had tried to reassure her that things would be okay, that she was still loved, but Emily couldn't shake the feeling of being invisible to the people who should have known her best. The pain of being forgotten on her birthday, of being forgotten every day, gnawed at her. Jack's voice pulled her back to the present. "Maybe you should talk to them again, Em," he suggested gently, looking at her with concern. "You can't keep it all bottled up. They might not know how much it hurts." But even as he said it, Emily could feel the weight of her own indecision. Part of her was terrified of confronting the truth, the part of her that feared her parents might not even care enough to listen. Could she handle another rejection? Emily walked back to her apartment that evening, her footsteps slow and deliberate. Jack's words echoed in her mind, "You have to speak up. They can't know if you don't tell them." She had been so consumed by the weight of her own silence that it had become easier to avoid the confrontation altogether. But avoiding it was doing more harm than good. She had to face her parents. For the first time in years, she felt the urge to speak her truth. She had been carrying this pain alone, hoping someone would notice, but it wasn't fair to keep expecting others to read her mind. She needed to ask for what she deserved. Yet, even as the determination started to rise in her chest, doubt crept in. What if they didn't care? What if her words fell on deaf ears? Her breath caught in her throat as she stepped through the door of her apartment. She had called her mother, she had tried to reach out, but the cold distance was still there. Could she really break through that wall? Her fingers hovered over her phone, unsure whether to dial her parents' number or let it sit. She had never felt so torn, caught between the desire for connection and the fear of rejection. It took several deep breaths before Emily finally found the courage to dial her mother's number. The phone rang, each second feeling like a small eternity. When her mother's voice finally answered, Emily felt her heart race. "Hi, Mom," she said softly, the words feeling heavy as they left her mouth. "We need to talk." There was a pause on the other end, and Emily could hear the faint rustle of something being set down. "About what, honey?" Her mother's voice still carried a hint of distraction, but this time, Emily wasn't going to let it slide. "About my birthday," Emily said, her voice shaking just a little. "About everything. I need you to hear me, Mom. I need you to understand that I'm hurt, that I've been hurting for a long time." She could hear her mother shift on the other end of the line. "Oh, sweetie, I didn't mean to make you feel like that." The words fell off her mother's tongue, but they didn't sound sincere, not like they had in the past. Emily swallowed hard, pushing the emotion back, and spoke again. "You didn't make me feel anything. I feel it all by myself, alone. I'm invisible to you now, and I don't know how much longer I can handle it." The silence on the other end was deafening, and for a long moment, Emily thought her mother might hang up. But then, her mother's voice, quieter now, came through. "I'm sorry, Emily. I didn't know you felt this way." Her mother's apology was not enough. Emily knew it, felt it in her bones. The words were empty, like a hollow echo in a vast space. She had wanted to believe that things could change, that the distance between them could be bridged with a simple conversation. But as her mother continued to apologize, Emily realized that the gulf between them was too wide, too deep. "It's not just about the birthday, Mom," Emily said, her voice steady despite the wave of anger bubbling inside her. "It's about every little thing I've been missing. The calls, the check-ins, the time spent together. You don't see me anymore, and I don't know how much longer I can pretend like that's okay." The silence on the other end was long, too long, and Emily could feel the anger rising in her chest. She had always been the one to give, to forgive, but she was done now. Done with pretending, done with expecting something that wasn't there. "I'm not asking for much, just for you to see me, to care." And with that, Emily ended the call. She sat there for a long time afterward, the silence pressing down on her like a heavy weight, and wondered if it was too late for any of it to matter. Emily leaned back on the couch, her eyes staring blankly at the wall ahead. The tension from the phone call still lingered in the air, thick and suffocating. She had spoken her truth, but now that it was out there, she wasn't sure what to do with it. The anger had given way to a dull ache in her chest, one she couldn't shake. She had wanted her mother to understand, to feel the same hurt she had, but it wasn't that simple. Nothing was ever that simple. Jack had been right. She couldn't keep it all inside. But now that she had spoken, the silence that followed felt more oppressive than the weight of her unspoken feelings. What came next? Would her mother change? Would her family start seeing her again, or would this moment be lost in the same abyss that had swallowed everything else? Emily didn't know, and that uncertainty was more painful than anything else. She couldn't control how they responded, but she could control how she moved forward. "I have to let go," she whispered to herself, the words feeling foreign but necessary. She had done what she could. Now it was time for her to find her own path. The days following the phone call were a blur. Emily felt as though she was floating, caught in a limbo between anger and acceptance. The truth was out there now. She had told her parents how she felt, but the response had been lukewarm at best. She couldn't stop thinking about that call. Her mother had apologized, but Emily knew deep down that the apology wasn't enough. She wanted more. She needed more. She needed them to truly see her, to understand the weight of what she had been carrying for years. Yet, in the silence that followed the conversation, Emily started to wonder if she was simply fooling herself. Maybe this was as good as it was going to get. Maybe she had to accept that her parents had moved on, that their lives no longer included her in the way she had once hoped. But then, something unexpected happened. Jack called her late one evening, his voice urgent and full of emotion. "Emily, I've been thinking about what you said, about your parents. You're not the only one who's been keeping things hidden," he said, his tone serious. "I think there's something you need to know. I've kept this from you because I didn't want to hurt you, but it's time." Emily's heart began to race, her mind spinning with a million possibilities. What could he possibly mean? What truth had he been hiding? Jack's words were like a jolt to Emily's system. She could hardly process what he was saying, but his voice was steady as he continued. I didn't want you to find out this way, but your parents aren't the people you think they are. There's something going on behind the scenes. Something they've been hiding for a long time. Emily's pulse quickened as she tried to keep up with his words. What do you mean? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack hesitated before speaking again, as if choosing his words carefully. I don't know all the details, but I've seen things, heard things. Your parents have been keeping secrets from you, big ones, things that could explain why they've been distant, why they've changed. Emily's mind was reeling, her stomach churning with a mix of disbelief and fear. What could possibly explain the sudden shift in their behavior? Why hadn't Jack told her this before? I know this is a lot to take in, Jack continued, his voice softer now. But you deserve to know the truth. Your parents aren't who you think they are. And it's time for you to find out what's really going on. Emily's breath caught in her throat. The room seemed to close in around her as the weight of Jack's words sank in. Was this the answer she had been waiting for? Was this the reason her parents had been so distant? Emily hung up the phone with a shaky hand, her mind in a whirlwind of confusion and disbelief. What had Jack meant? What were her parents hiding? She tried to calm herself, but the flood of questions was overwhelming. The world she had known for years suddenly felt like it had been built on shaky ground. She had trusted her parents, loved them unconditionally, but now everything was called into question. She couldn't shake the thought that there was something deeper, something darker, lurking beneath the surface of their lives. It felt like the ground beneath her feet was shifting, and she was afraid of what she might uncover. But she had to know. She had to find out the truth. She couldn't keep living in ignorance, letting her parents' silence dictate her life. Emily's heart raced as she stood up, pacing back and forth in the small apartment. Her mind flashed with images of her childhood, her parents laughing around the dinner table, their voices warm and loving. But now, it all seemed like a lie. She had to confront them. She had to know what they were hiding, even if it meant destroying everything she had believed in. Emily's decision was made, but the path forward wasn't clear. She didn't know how she was going to confront her parents, or what exactly she was supposed to say. What could she even ask them? How could she explain that she had heard things, that she knew there was more to their behavior than they were letting on? Her mind raced with 1,000 scenarios, each one more terrifying than the last. But the one thing she knew for sure was that she couldn't let this go. The truth was out there, and no matter how much it scared her, she had to face it. The next morning she gathered her courage, picked up the phone, and dialed her mother's number. It rang twice before her mother answered, her voice still cheerful, but now tinged with uncertainty. Emily? Everything okay? There was a pause before Emily spoke, her voice unwavering, but filled with emotion. We need to talk, Mom. About everything. About the secrets. About what's been going on. Her mother's voice faltered. What do you mean, sweetie? Emily felt the knot in her stomach tighten. I know there's something you're not telling me, and I need to know the truth. Now. As Emily waited for her mother's response, every second felt like an eternity. She could hear her mother's breath on the other end, hesitating. The silence between them stretched on, thick with unspoken words. Finally, her mother's voice came through, quieter now, almost a whisper. Emily, I didn't want you to know. I thought it would be better if you didn't. Emily's heart sank, but she kept her voice steady. Why, Mom? Why didn't you just tell me? What are you hiding? There was another long pause, and then her mother spoke, her words heavy with guilt. We didn't want you to be hurt, sweetheart. But your father and I have been keeping a secret. It's not what you think. It's more complicated than you know. Emily's mind reeled as her mother's confession sank in. The life she had known, the family she had always believed in, was unraveling in front of her. The truth was far more complicated than she could have imagined, and yet, it was the truth. The pieces of the puzzle were finally starting to fit together, but at what cost? Emily stood in front of her parents' house, her heart pounding in her chest. The truth had come out. Her mother had confessed to the secret she had been hiding. An affair. Emily's father had been distant for years, but now the reason was painfully clear. The betrayal hit harder than anything she could have imagined. Her mother, standing on the porch with tears in her eyes, spoke first. "I never wanted you to find out this way, Em," she whispered. "I was afraid of how much it would hurt you. I was trying to protect you." Emily's fists clenched at her sides, the anger building within her. "Protect me," she spat, her voice trembling. "You've been lying to me my entire life, and this is how you protect me?" Her father appeared in the doorway, his face drawn and weary. "Emily, I didn't want you to know this way," he said softly. But Emily's anger boiled over. "Did you think I wouldn't notice? Did you think I wouldn't figure out why you've been so distant?" The words poured out of her, each one sharp and cutting. "I've been begging for your attention, your love, and you've been hiding behind lies." Her father's eyes filled with regret, but the damage was done. There was no going back now. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice thick with emotion, but the apology felt meaningless. The truth had shattered everything. Emily's voice trembled as she spoke the final words she had been holding back for years. "You both had a chance to make this right, but you didn't." The silence that followed was deafening. Emily had poured out everything she had been carrying, and now there was nothing left to say. Her parents' faces were etched with guilt, but the damage was done. Emily turned away, unable to look at them anymore. The emotional weight of the moment hit her like a wave, and she realized that no matter what, her relationship with her parents could never go back to the way it was. "I'm done," she whispered under her breath, walking away from the house and out of their lives for good. Emily returned to her apartment, her heart still pounding from the confrontation. She had done it. She had spoken her truth, and now she had to live with the consequences. As she sat down on the couch, the weight of everything she had been holding in finally came crashing down. The tears she had been holding back flowed freely now. She had lost her parents, but in a way, she had also gained something. A sense of closure, of finally understanding the truth. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in years, she felt a glimmer of hope. It was the beginning of her own journey, one where she could move forward without the weight of their lies holding her back. Emily looked out the window, the city lights flickering in the distance. She had no idea what the future held, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid. The truth had set her free, and while it had cost her the relationship with her parents, it had also given her the courage to take control of her own life. "I'm going to be okay," she whispered to herself. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but it was hers to walk, and that was enough. Weeks passed after the confrontation with her parents, and the weight of the truth had begun to settle within Emily. She had taken time to heal, to reflect on the things that truly mattered. Her relationship with her parents had been irreparably damaged, but Emily was learning to move forward. It wasn't easy. There were still moments when the pain of their neglect would creep up on her, but she was stronger now, more aware of her worth. Jack had been there through it all, offering a steady presence of support. One evening, as Emily and Jack sat on her couch, she turned to him with a small smile. "I've started to understand that I'm not just my parents' daughter. I'm me, and that's enough." Jack smiled back, his eyes warm. "I'm proud of you, Em. You're finding your own way now." Emily nodded, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. She had faced her fears, her anger, and now she was ready to embrace the future, whatever it held. One afternoon, Emily received a letter from her mother, postmarked from the family home. Her heart raced as she opened it, unsure of what to expect. The letter was long, filled with words of regret and sorrow. Her mother wrote about the pain she had caused, acknowledging the secrets and the distance that had torn their relationship apart. But there was one thing that stood out. "I understand if you can't forgive me, but I hope one day you'll let me try." Emily sat in silence after reading the letter. Her mother's words, though painful, carried a sincerity that made her heart ache. She didn't know if she was ready to forgive, but the letter gave her hope. Hope that, perhaps there could be a way forward, even if it wasn't the same as before. Emily tucked the letter away, unsure of what to do next. It was a step forward, a sign that her mother was acknowledging the distance between them. She didn't know if forgiveness was possible, but the door had been opened. Over the next few days, Emily found herself reflecting on the things she wanted for her future. She couldn't change the past, but she could shape her own path from here on out. And that realization gave her a sense of freedom. She wasn't defined by her parents' mistakes, nor was she bound by the emotional chaos they had caused. For the first time in a long time, Emily felt like she was in control of her own life. A few weeks later, Emily made the difficult decision to visit her parents. She didn't know what would come of it, but the weight of the unresolved pain was still heavy on her heart. As she stood on their porch, about to knock, her hands shook slightly. It had been a long time since she'd been here, since she'd been in their presence. Her mother answered the door, her eyes immediately softening as she saw Emily standing there. "Em, I didn't expect you, but I'm so glad you're here." Emily took a deep breath, stepping inside. There was no grand gesture, no instant healing, but it was a start. A small, hesitant step toward healing. For now, that was enough. As Emily left her parents' house that afternoon, she felt an unfamiliar sense of peace. The conversation had been difficult, but it was real. She didn't know what the future held for her and her parents, but she understood now that healing was a process, not a destination. She couldn't control how they changed, but she could control how she responded to their actions. And for the first time in years, she felt a deep sense of closure. Emily knew she would always carry the scars of their neglect, but she also knew she had the strength to move forward on her own terms. She wasn't defined by her parents' mistakes anymore. She was her own person. And that was enough. Emily stood by the window, watching the sunset, finally feeling peace. The past no longer defined her. She whispered to herself, "I'm going to be okay." It was a quiet affirmation, but one she truly believed now. Walking with Jack through the city streets, Emily smiled. "I'm good. Better than I've been in a long time." Jack smiled back, proud of her. Together they faced the future, free from the past's weight. On the beach, Emily stood alone, the sound of waves soothing her. She realized she wasn't burdened by the past anymore. She smiled, feeling free and ready to embrace whatever came next. Her mother reached out again, and they spoke honestly. Emily wasn't ready for full trust, but she was open to healing. Forgiveness was a process, and Emily was learning to set boundaries. Standing on her balcony, Emily felt ready for the future. She had faced her past, found strength in herself, and now she was prepared for whatever was next. "I'm ready," she whispered.